Each Sunday, I'm reading a chapter from Sacred Hellos, Messages from Heaven, my book all about grief and loss. As I'm rereading these chapters, it is amazing to me how relevant these lessons are. As I'm selling everything and getting ready to move abroad, they're relevant for that and making that life change. And they're also so relevant for all of the chaos that's happening in America and dealing with stress, this time of uncertainty. So many of these stories and tools are the same. I'm so glad you're here for this next chapter of Sacred Hellos. Hi, thank you for being here. I've pulled it together after last week's video, and today I'm going to read the weeks after. I'll show you the illustration from this page. It says reaching, trusting, learning, feeling, connecting. The weeks after. 3 weeks out from my mom's death, and I was only beginning to feel its realness. After living across the country in Texas years before, I was used to going months without physically seeing my mom and dad. It took a few weeks for my body to fully comprehend that I would not be seeing her again. I had to stop treating myself to a daily iced caramel mocha. I had sunk about $100 into these drinks over the last few weeks, and I was noticing my pants getting tighter. I decided I would allow a couple a week. It was one of the only things that I was looking forward to on the 45-minute drive each morning as I headed to what was my parents' house, but now was my dad's house. During this time, I worked as a project coordinator for my dad's company. It was an incredibly fascinating job back when life was normal. We would go into companies and we would analyze their entire process from when they would get products to when they would ship them. We would write down every keystroke they made on their computers, every time they took their fingers off the keyboard to touch their mouse, every single step. We would write up detailed ways for them to simplify and streamline the process. We would install shipping software and use that to connect their inventory and their contact management programs to the shipping company websites. I loved the work and the variety of people. My dad owned the company, so it was relatively easy for us to take a few weeks off. Our clients were more than understanding. I continued to work part-time for him for a few months as we slowly put our lives back together in some way that resembled that of functioning people. I was also working as an artist. I had a big Valentine's Day show scheduled. In a perfectly orchestrated way from above, the story about me and my upcoming art show ended up in the exact same printing of the newspaper as my mom's obituary. There was a protective bubble around me those first couple months. People sent well wishes, but for the most part gave us space. The 3-month mark is when I felt like things started crashing in on me. Clients who had waited to ask questions all came calling and messaging at the same time. Some people around me felt like 3 months is long enough and I should be done grieving by then. I wanted to scream. Yet the tears would not stop flowing. How could I be healed and done grieving already? I was only beginning to feel what was real and that this had really happened. I was starting to come out of survival mode and feeling glimpses of real life without my mom all around me. I was only 31 years old. How could I imagine my life after this without her? I would pick up the phone to call her out of instinct only to remember she was not there. My daughter was a preteen and needed my focus. Work continued. The world was sympathetic as long as they could be. I was now expected to rejoin society. Only I was not ready. I felt as if I had a large ball of twine, only instead of twine, they were thoughts. It was as if I might finally be able to get a handle on this ball of thoughts and gauge how big it is. If I could just think through my next memory or my next concern, only the next memory would not make the ball feel any more measurable. Each thought added a strand to this mental ball that slowly I realized was impossible to contain. I could never fully get my arms around it to understand its size or its weight. I thought if I could see how big this ball was, then I could form a plan of action. I could regain some control again in my life. Looking back, there was not a specific day that I finally felt like I got a full grasp on this ball of thoughts and feelings. It was more gradual. At some point, I felt throughout my body that I could have a memory or feel a moment of wishing she were here, and it did not have to carry that whole ball of feelings along with it. I could simply let the feeling be as it is. Let it pass through me, thank it, notice it, and keep moving forward. The thought of a memory simply passing through would have devastated me early on. I did not want to be able to let something move through or leave me. I wanted to sit in the sadness for a bit, sit with her. Sit in a space of stop time and be with her in my mind. Only the rest of the world kept moving on, and it felt unfair, and I did not want to join everyone else in the world that decided things would keep moving on. Thankfully, I was able to continue to carve out little spaces to mentally sit in. I was a lucky one. Days after my dear friend gave birth to her first child, her mom died. Her world could not stop. Her sweet baby needed her to keep showing up. I hear from people all the time that only had a day or two off work, sometimes a week, and then they had to be back trying to function as if their heart had not been ripped outside of their body. I worry that there's too many of us walking around that have never been able to heal. Instead, life had to continue for us, whether for money reasons or fear of feeling all of those feelings. We've had to jump back into a schedule and carry on. Feelings have a way, though, of coming out if we do not honor them and heal. And too often they control us, and they will fight their way out at the worst times later in life. It brings me back to what I shared in the introduction. I'll link that video in the description. When we suppress our negative emotions long term, internally our bodies are still reacting to the emotions no matter how together we appear on the outside. The results are not good and can even limit our future positive emotions as well. So even when our brains are like, nope, you got this, just full speed ahead, our bodies are reacting still. I have a different friend who lost her husband to cancer. A few weeks later, she learned that she was going to have to continue to let herself feel all the sadness, but she was going to keep herself tethered to the other side of grief by doing one thing each day that made her happy. In her case, she had been grieving on some level for months. Her approach may not fit someone who just experienced an unexpected loss, but it was perfect for her. She honored herself by knowing her life was not over and trusted she would have joy again. She did not force massive amounts of joy, but she also did not let the sadness swallow her whole. Finding one thing a day to feel happy about may seem like no big deal to someone who's not in a sad state. However, when the world seems dark and sad, it's the bravest thing to set an intention like that. To find a way, even in those darkest moments, to see happiness in something is so beautiful and strong. She inspired me that day. I have held on to her story, inspired by the idea that we are each different, that we can listen to other people's grief, how they handle it, and learn from them. Ultimately, for each of us, it comes down to trusting our own needs and reaching out when we need to. This was an illustration of my attempt to somewhat show that ball of grief where just the thoughts and it's so, you can't quite get a handle on it. I'm a planner. I'm someone who I want to address the problem. Let's lay out a plan. Let's fix things. Let's feel it. Let's schedule some time if we can to feel the feelings. And grief does not work like that. Was some lessons in that experience that I was not excited to receive or learn from. I'm going to take a drink and then I'm going to share one more story here. I had a friend since I've written this book whose husband passed away. And she is a woman who has inspired me for over a decade. Just this really fun, spunky, lovely lovely woman, and her husband had been dealing with some health challenges for years. And so this was not a surprise, but it's always devastating because you don't know when, and there's still things left unsaid, and there's still hope, and all of that is, that chapter closes in a sense. And she had a trip planned, a dream trip of hers planned to Italy shortly after he passed. And I think for most of us, we would have canceled that trip. And instead, she knew that she was just going to have to do it. He would have wanted her to do it. She's in her 70s. This was the time for her to get to do that. And so she chose to go over there. She was with friends where she could just be raw and real and feel, but also get to kind of pull in some of life's joys to buoy her through that time. And then just had a later memorial for him. And it wasn't as if she was able to put pause on the grief, but life's there waiting. And it taught me a really important lesson that sometimes we feel like we have to just immediately do things how they've always been done. And whether it was the pandemic or just inspiration from others, we realize things can change. You don't have to have a funeral 5 days after someone passes. You can wait months. You can give yourself time to catch your breath so that you can be present at that experience. There's no perfect way to do it, but especially if it's a spouse or a child and you have the say, do what works for you so that you can honor them in the way that you need to. And what my friend did, where she was able to really give herself a lifeline after being somewhat of a caretaker and having a sick spouse for years, is another sort of an energy thing. And while she would never openly complain, I can't imagine energetically what that is like. I mean, I can somewhat imagine, but I know I can't fully imagine. And for her to honor herself was such a lesson to me as someone in my 40s that life will continue on and no one's going to step in and give you permission to honor yourself. But what a beautiful thing if you can do that and then come back and ultimately honor him and them and everything in an even better way because you are filled up a little in yourself, or at least glued the cracks slightly to allow yourself a deep breath. So that is a chapter from Sacred Hellos. It's a book I wrote 5 years ago, and I'm rereading all the chapters, sharing one each Sunday. The next chapter I'm going to read is called Dream Visit. I'm actually going to read you one more quick story. I have in here several stories from people who submitted their signed stories, and this one is called Pennies from Marley May. So let me go to page 40. So here's the illustration for that one. So this was submitted by Josie. My daughter Marley was just 2.5 years old when she passed away from cancer. When given the terminal diagnosis, they told us she had weeks to months left to live, but they could not say for sure. We were given just 2 more beautiful weeks with her. The night before the funeral, we were setting up the church with pictures and other mementos of Marley. I went to go grab a bag of photos, sitting in the church pew. When I picked it up, there were 2 pennies underneath. I had a funny feeling, and I just knew pennies were going to be my sign from Marley, letting me know she is near. Days after that, we were looking for a new vehicle. I wanted a dark brown color, my favorite color of vehicle at the time. We found one that fit the description and took it for a drive. I was in the passenger seat and we were cruising along looking at the eagles along the river. Eagles were always a sign from my grandma who had passed. I always paid close attention to them, and there had to have been over 20 of them. I began checking out the car, and I looked in the cup holder in the door, and there was a penny. I excitedly picked it up. I had gotten a sign from Marley, just moments after admiring the eagles that were all God winks from my grandma. I didn't know what prompted me to do it, but I looked at the date, 1993, the year I was born. A couple days later, we traveled about 50 miles to another dealership. There was another vehicle in my color of choice that we wanted to drive. As we were going down the road again, me riding in the passenger seat, I opened the center console to look at the layout, and sure enough, there was a bright penny, 2015, the year Marley was born. We bought that car. I never could tell Marley no, and was not about to start now. Finding change in cars is not uncommon. It is rolling all over my floorboards. This was different though. These were freshly detailed vehicles, not even purchased yet, and cleaned by professionals. The chance of finding change twice seems fairly uncommon to me. By Josie. I love hearing stories from others and the signs that they get. So, Sacred Hellos. I'll put the link if you want to get this book for yourself or as a gift for someone else. It's available on Amazon and Kindle. I'm going to keep reading a chapter every Sunday, so I hope to see you next Sunday as well. Lastly, if you have a sign story you want to share, I invite you to do so. Or if you want to talk about the weeks or months after your loss and how transitioning back into real life looked for you, please share. I invite you to, and whether it's simply a story or if you have lessons you learned through that time, I think that we all have things we can learn from each other's stories, and we're all here to support you. So thanks for being here. I wish you all the best.